On the October 15th, New World Aeternum is coming. It's not a new game or an expansion, but it is a massive update that marks a polished new chapter for the game since its launch 3 years ago. New World Aeternum brings a ton of exciting updates. There is of course the very first 10-player raid, the Hive of Gargons, a huge free-for-all PvP area, increased gear score, console release, bigger servers, starting loadouts, better optimization, finished quest lines, PvP matchmaking, repeatable boss fights, stagger or normal attacks in PvE. But today, we're not diving into the usual updates. You can find plenty of videos of these changes elsewhere. No, today we're going full nerd mode. We're digging into something that hasn't been talked about much yet. Changes to threats and taunts. So, like the true nerd I am, I was deep diving into New World's beta datasheets, until finally I found some undiscovered mysteries, and exactly like Christopher Columbus did, I thought I should make a YouTube video about it, so here we go, time to show you the nerdy stuff. In the datasheets, there's a file called damagetable.csv that outlines how each player attack works. One column in particular caught my attention: Threat Multiplier. I'd heard that AGS was working on changes to how threat and taunts are generated, so I decided to take a closer look. In this file, each line of the data is a damage row. These rows reference different types of damage, like abilities or dots. Each column is giving details about this damage row. If it's considered a ranged attack, a light attack, a heavy attack, or an ability, the damage type, or more importantly the damage coefficient, which is here to calculate the damage the ability will do. But if we go further to the right of the sheet, all the way to here, this part of the data is all related to threats and taunts. But by the way, if you are very casual to New World, you probably wonder even what threat is. Threat, you can think it like an invisible aura that determines if you'll be the main target, or we say have aggro. Your threat level mainly changes based on the damage you deal, healing you provide, and certain perks that affect it. As opposed to taunt, which is just forcing enemies to choose you as the main threat for a certain duration. So now that that's clear, let's go back to our sheet. The threat and taunt area of this data is divided in 6 columns. Threat multiplier, that tells how much the attack is raising your threat. If it's 1, then it generates the default amount of threat. 0 means it doesn't generate any threat, below 1 means it generates less threat than most attacks, and above 1, you guessed it, means you'll generate more threat with this attack than others. Then we have add threat, which doesn't look relevant. It's the same as threat multiplier, but in its additive form, but there's not much interesting to see here for this time. And finally, we have 4 columns, here related to the taunts. Ease taunt, taunt duration, taunt threat boost percentage, and taunt minimum threat value. These last 2 are a bit tricky, but basically the first one boosts the threat you generate with a taunt. The second one sets a minimum threshold, so if your threat is below that value when you taunt, it gets bumped up to meet it. If you want to go deeper into understanding how threat works, here's what we assume to be the threat formula, pretty much. Okay, so now you know everything on how to find this kind of data. Now we just have to look at each damage row, compare the beta version and the live version, and interpret the damage identifiers to assign them to their in-game names. And here we have it, the threat changes of New World Aeternum. First up, the blocking threat multiplier has been buffed from 1 to 2. So now, when you block damage, you'll generate twice as much threat as before. Then, when you do damage, your threat gets higher. But how strong it works depends on the tag threat multiplier, as we talked about it before. The default value, which is used for most of the attacks in the game, is 1. But this value has changed for a few attacks. On the sword, it has been increased. When you do a simple light attack, it was 1, now it's 1.5. On your third light attack, your damage creates twice more threat as before. And the heavy attack, fully charged or not, gets a threat multiplier of 3. So this will greatly help sword users to keep the aggro from the enemies, without having to do as much damage as his DPS friends. This is even more true as sword already had the shield bash, which has a threat multiplier of 5, and 10 when it's upgraded in a skill tree, and the Shield Rush with also a threat multiplier of 10. To compare, there's only one other weapon with some threat multipliers higher than 1, and that is the Greatsword with 1.5 on the Steadfast ability hit and 2 on the Rupture hit. Then, the threat multiplier has been decreased for a few attacks that were causing DPS players or healers to steal aggro too easily. These are now set at 0.5. The Void Blade and the Orb of Decay on the Void Gauntlet, the Skewer from Spear, Tondo from Rapier, Powder Burn from the Musket, the Flamethrower and the Burnout from the Fire Staff. There is also this special case of the Riposte Stun, which for some reason had a threat multiplier of 10, it's now reduced to 1. And then many damage over time abilities also have got their threat multiplier halved. From what I could find, it's the case for the Smolder Burn from Fire Staff, the Rapier Bleeds, every Void Gauntlet dot, the Bleeds from the Greatsword, Impairment Arcane dots from the Flail, Pestilence Artifact Poison, the Burn from the Grenade upgrade of the Blunderbuss, the Burn from the Explosive Arrow, the Bleed from the Musket Traps, the Bleeds from the Butcher Artifact and the Gladiator Artifact, the Poison from the Venom Artifact, the Bile Bomb, the Firestorm, as well as the Poison from the Cunning Devourer Heart Rune, the Kenny Jacked perk, the Runeglass dots, and finally also the Shirking Elemental perks and the Elemental Attunement perks, which are considered by the game as one-tick dots. And finally, for the threat multiplier column, there were 4 healing perks that were not generating threat before and had their threat multiplier up from 0 to 0.5, which are the Purity of Light perk, the Purifying Breeze perk on Lifestaff, and the 2 instant healing ring perks, Healing Breeze and Purifying, even though we are not sure if this will change anything on the threat caused by these perks, as they don't really do damage, they do healing. Talking about healings though, we're done with the changes on threat multiplier, we can quickly talk about the heal threat multiplier, which works the same as the normal threat multiplier, but this one multiplies the threat of the healings made. And this will be a great news for healers mad at their tanks because they keep stealing aggro. Pretty much all sources of healing will generate less threat, as you can see here. The heal from Orb of Protection will generate 5 times less threat. From light attacks, Divine Embrace, Light's Embrace and the ultimate, they will generate 2.5 times less threat. The Splash of Light Sacred Ground Beacon will generate twice less threat. And for the Void Gauntlet the same happens, the Void Caller Ultimate's heal will generate 5 times less threat, and the heals from the Orb and the Rupture when it fades with its upgrade are 2.5 times less threatening. Now that's all for the healing. Let's talk about probably the thing you will feel the most changing how you play in PvE. The heavy attacks of some weapons will now apply Taunt. You heard me well, a Taunt. So forcing aggro on the attacker for only 0.5 second duration. Their sword, in addition with the threat buffs that we already talked about, the hammer, spear, rapier, hatchet, greatsword, great axe and flail. And it makes sense, this goes on with the will from AGS to make heavy attacks more useful and different from the light attacks, at least in PvE, as if you didn't know, we will also get changes on the Ice Gauntlet, with its heavy attack applying a 10% slow for 3 seconds with 6-second cooldown. For the Void Gauntlet, the heavy attacks will go through enemies, and the heavy attacks from the Life Staff will push enemies back 2 meters. And finally, there is one last change concerning threat. AGS is buffing all the already existing taunts a little bit by increasing the values of their taunt threat boost percentage by more than twice, and taunt minimum threat value by almost twice, which basically means that the taunts we know will also generate more threats, making the player taunting more keen to keep aggro when the taunt effect fades. While the new taunts from melee heavy attacks get these values equal to the ones we have on the live version for the usual taunts. So, to sum things up, threats and taunts are changing a bit for this new version of New World. In New World Aeternum, threat from the sword's light and heavy attacks have been buffed, halving the threat of some DPS weapons to be less keen to steal aggro, Void Blade, Powder Burn, Flamethrower, Skewer, Tondo, Riposte, halving the threat made by pretty much every dot capacity, and also greatly reducing the threat from heals from Lifestaff and Void Gauntlet. All heavy melee attacks will now apply a small 0.5 second taunt on hit, and the other taunt abilities get buffed to increase the threat of the player. And that's all for this topic. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this kind of video with the kind of educational part at the beginning to show the process, or if you prefer the information coming straight to your mouths. I'd love to hear your thought. You can also let me know in the comments what you think of this change. Do you think it's good to make aggro management easier and less frustrating? Or do you think it is a bad change and that it makes high-end PvE too casual friendly? If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe. I'll be back streaming on Twitch a lot when New World Aeternum gets released, so feel free to join me there and on Discord for updates or any questions. Have a great day, don't forget to smile, and thanks for watching.